The soft glow of amber sconces washed over the velvet walls of the Marigny Lantern, New Orleans' most intimate jazz lounge, where saxophones murmured like distant lovers, and the scent of magnolia drifted in on every opening of the heavy carved doors. It was a place chosen carefully, lovingly, chosen by Dr. Amara Lewis herself, because it carried the memory of a night when everything between her and Evan had felt effortless. 10 years earlier, they'd stumbled into this very lounge while wandering the quarter hand in hand, drunk on music and possibility. Tonight, she believed, would be a return to that beginning. Amara arrived early, as she always did, preferring to settle into her surroundings rather than rush into them. She wore a silk dress the color of deep river water, a hue that shimmered like it held its own secrets. The maitre d' led her to a table near the stage, where a single candle flickered expectantly, its flame dancing with the soft improvisations floating down from the musician's mezzanine. She touched the rim of her glass, feeling the chill of the champagne flute, and allowed herself a small smile. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of shared ambition, mismatched schedules, whispered apologies, and promises for slower days. She had told herself, had convinced herself, that tonight Evan would remember the woman she'd been before life demanded she become everything else. The minutes passed gently at first, marked by changes in tempo in the clinking of silverware. A server refilled her water. A couple at the next table toasted privately. The singer eased into a sultry rendition of "Do You Know What It Means to Miss New Orleans?" and Amara allowed her gaze to soften. She imagined Evan walking in with that boyish half-smile he saved only for her, saying, "Happy anniversary, Mara. I didn't forget." It would be enough. It had to be. She glanced toward the entrance just as the heavy doors opened, letting a slice of city night spill into the dim room. For a heartbeat, hope fluttered in her chest. Evan stepped inside, tall, polished, carrying the easy charm that once felt like sunlight to her. But he wasn't alone. A young blonde woman slipped in beside him, her hand brushing his arm with familiarity that didn't belong to strangers. Lena Walsh. Amara recognized her instantly from photographs, Evan's new campaign strategist, the one donors seemed enamored with. Lena laughed softly at something Evan said, tipping her face toward him with a kind of confidence that left no room for misunderstanding. Amara's breath caught, not dramatically, not loudly, but in a quiet tightening of her throat that felt like a crack spreading through glass. Evan didn't look up right away. He didn't search for Amara at the table he should have known. He leaned closer to Lena, guiding her through the lounge with a touch at the small of her back, an intimate gesture that had once belonged to Amara alone. They moved as if rehearsed, as if this moment had played out many nights before. Reality arrived not like a blow, but like a slow, suffocating pressure. Her fingers went numb around the stem of her glass. The candle on her table flickered unsteadily, as if mirroring her breath. 15 seconds, perhaps less, passed before Evan finally lifted his gaze. His expression shifted, splintering into shock, confusion, and something darker, fear. Amara didn't stand. She didn't cry. She didn't allow a single tremor to escape her posture. Years of museum openings and donor galas had taught her how to remain composed beneath scrutiny. But inside, something tender, something loyal, something that had believed in forever, began to unravel. Their eyes met across the dim room, and in that suspended instant, the truth stood naked between them. The music swelled, heartbreakingly indifferent. Amara inhaled deeply, letting the coolness of the lounge settle into her lungs. She eased her napkin onto the table, lifted her chin with the grace of a woman who refused to be diminished, and rose. Her movements were deliberate, elegant, an art piece in motion. And as she walked past Evan, past the table that should have held celebration instead of betrayal, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence said everything he had chosen not to. Outside, the night embraced her with warm, humid arms, and she exhaled slowly, letting the sting of truth settle into something she could name later. Hurt. fury, grief, or all of them at once. But even heartbreak has its audience, its witnesses, its tellers of truth. If you're moved by Amara's story, the quiet pain, the unspoken strength, remember to like, comment, and follow so you can journey with her through every twist, revelation, and rising moment still ahead. The door to the hallway closed behind Amara with a soft click, muting the saxophone's velvet cry. Out here, away from the haze of candlelight and murmured conversations, the air shifted, cooler, sharper, as if the building itself refused to indulge illusion. She hadn't planned where to go. There was no conscious choice, no neat line of thought. Her body moved before her mind could name what was happening, drawn down the narrow corridor toward the small gilt sign that read, "Ladies." The letters blurred for a moment, then refocused as she pushed the door open. Inside, the powder room was a world apart from the low-lit intimacy of the lounge. White tile, softly glowing sconces, a long marble counter lined with glass vases of cream-colored roses. A distant fan hummed a steady, indifferent note. A mirror ran the length of the wall, throwing back an image Amara had spent years curating, composed, elegant, untouchable. The door eased shut behind her. Silence folded in. For a heartbeat, she simply stood there, her hands still on the brass handle, the echo of the outside scene replaying in vicious clarity. Evan's hand at the small of Lena's back. Lena's easy, unself-conscious laugh. The way he had looked at the younger woman, attentive, tuned in, like the rest of the room didn't exist, like Amara didn't exist. The thought struck her with such force that the strength in her knees softened. She crossed the tiled floor in measured steps, the heels of her shoes tapping out a fragile rhythm. At the counter, she placed her palms on the cool marble and bowed her head, eyes closing as if the darkness behind them might be kinder than the light. For a moment, she tried to breathe the way she told anxious artists to breathe before a debut. In slowly, out slowly. Count to 4. Anchor yourself in the present. But this was the present. This was the problem. When she finally lifted her head, the woman in the mirror looked almost like a stranger. Her hair, glossy coils pinned into a careful chignon, remained immaculate. Her makeup had not yet smudged. The lipstick still traced her mouth in deep plum. The dress fell flawlessly over her shoulders, the silk catching light like water. Only the eyes betrayed her. They had always been her most expressive feature, the place where delight and curiosity and fierce intelligence gathered. Tonight they were wide and too bright, ringed with a shimmer that had nothing to do with highlighter and everything to do with a storm rising behind them. 10 years, she whispered to her reflection, the words tasting foreign in the quiet room. 10 years of shared keys and shared dreams and calendars, stitched together more carefully than any wedding reception seating chart. 10 years of believing they were building something that belonged to them both. She pressed her lips together, as if she could hold the memories in place by sheer force of will. But memories are unruly things. They spill where they wish. The night he proposed in Jackson Square, kneeling slightly off-center because he'd misjudged the brick. Her laughter tangled with happy embarrassment as tourists applauded. The way he'd looked at her then, unguarded, reverent, as though she were not simply a woman, but a promise he meant to keep. The first grant she'd won for the museum, when she'd come home lit with triumph, and he'd swung her around the kitchen, her heels clattering against the worn wooden floor. "We're unstoppable, Mara," he'd said into her neck. "You and me against the whole city." Had he meant it then? Had there been a precise moment when intention shifted, when loyalty thinned, when you and me became you, me, and whatever I can't resist? Her fingers curled against the marble. The first tear fell without permission, a warm bead slipping down her cheek. She watched it in the mirror as if it belonged to someone else, tracing a fragile, gleaming path along skin that had made its peace with time, with work, with the careful balance of tenderness and resilience required to be a black woman in rooms where power rarely looked like her. Another tear followed, then another. There was no audience here, No donors or artists or journalists. No one to reassure that she was above the drama, untouched by spectacle. The performance could end. The mask could crack. Her shoulders shook once, a small tremor, as if her body were testing the depth of its own breaking. Then the tremor widened again, until it became a shudder that rose from somewhere deep and unnamed. Amara gripped the counter harder, head bowing as a sob escaped. Soft but raw, a sound she had not made in years. It was not dramatic. It was not operatic. It was simply honest. She was not thinking of Lena's hair or dress or laugh, not thinking of age or comparison. The wound cut in a different place, in that private territory where trust had taken root, in the quiet places where she had allowed herself to believe she could lean. That was what hurt. The knowledge that while she had been defending his vision in public meetings, he had been rewriting their private story without her consent. Another sob, then another. Her tears darkened the silk at her neckline, dampened the edges of her lashes. Time loosened. 10 minutes might have passed, or 3, or 20. Only the low hum of the ventilation and the distant murmur of jazz beyond the door marked that the world continued to turn. Eventually, the violence of the emotion ebbed, leaving something hollow and aching in its wake. Her breathing slowed. She reached, almost mechanically, for a tissue from the silver dispenser and dabbed at her cheeks, careful not to smear the careful lines of eyeliner she'd applied so patiently an hour ago. She thought of how often she had consoled heartbroken artists over rejected work, over stolen ideas, over betrayals dressed as collaboration. "You are still the author of your story," she had told them. "They can't take that from you." Now the phrase returned to her, not as polished wisdom, but as a question. Was she still the author? Or had she been letting someone else hold the pen for too long? She met her own gaze again in the mirror. The sheen of tears remained, but something had shifted behind them. The devastation was still there, but it had found a companion, something quieter, more dangerous, like resolve still learning the shape of itself. This, she understood dimly, was the moment before she called her sister, before lawyers and headlines and whispered conversations at gallery openings, before whatever version of herself would step into the world once this was done. For now, she was just a woman in a powder room, heart cracked open, standing at the edge of a life that no longer fit. Amara smoothed her damp hands over the sides of her dress, feeling the familiar glide of fabric. She adjusted a stray coil of hair that had slipped from its pin. When she finally turned away from the mirror, it wasn't because she was ready. It was because staying frozen in that reflection would mean accepting a role she no longer knew how to play. She reached for the door handle, paused, and let one last breath shiver through her. Then she stepped back into the hallway where the music waited, and beyond it, a city that would soon see her, and her unraveling, in an entirely new light. The night felt thicker when Amara stepped back into it, as if the air itself had shifted in the short time she'd been gone. The door of the Marigny lantern closed behind her with a hushed thud, sealing in the music, the clinking glassware, the soft ignorance of those who still believed this evening was ordinary. Outside, the French Quarter pulsed on. Neon signs hummed in electric blues and reds. Laughter spilled from balconies, and somewhere not far off, a brass band tested a melody that hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. A slow procession of carriages rolled past, hooves striking the uneven pavement, the faint scent of hay and leather mixing with beignets and spilled beer. New Orleans did not pause for heartbreak. It simply folded it into the soundtrack. Amara stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the city pressing in around her in warm, humid waves. Her phone lay cool and solid in her hand, weighty as a confession. She had no recollection of pulling it from her clutch, no conscious decision, only the instinctive reaching for something familiar when the ground gives way. She knew, even before she looked, that his name would already be there. Evan Whitfield. The screen lit up with a soft glow. 3 missed calls. 4. A new one was buzzing in even now, his name flashing insistently Like a siren she wanted desperately to silence and answer all at once. For years, his calls had meant late-night brainstorming, quick updates from the campaign trail. "I'm running behind, but I'll be home, promise." His voice had been the warm thread stitching the long days together, binding her schedule to his with invisible loops. Now the sight of his name felt like a bruise under her skin. She let it ring once, twice. The sound vibrated against her palm, reverberating up her arm as if her body itself recognized him before her heart could decide what it wanted. On the fourth ring, she pressed accept. There was a rush of ambient noise on his end, a clatter of dishes, an apologetic murmur from a server, the muted thump of footsteps, followed by his voice, low and strained. Amara. It was just her name, but it carried 1,000 nights with it, a decade of shared mornings, the way he used to say it when the world still felt small enough to hold between them. Part of her wanted to close her eyes and pretend nothing had happened, to step back into the version of reality where his voice meant safety. Instead, she held the phone a fraction further from her ear, as though distance could blunt the impact. She said nothing. Where are you?" he tried again, the words tumbling over one another. "Mara, just tell me where you are. We need to talk. That wasn't what it looked like." A laugh, thin and disbelieving, rose in her chest and caught in her throat. "Evan," she said softly, surprised at how even her voice sounded. "Do you hear yourself?" There was a pause. She began to walk, not because she knew where she was going, but because standing still made her feel like prey. Her heels clicked against the old stone, and the city unfolded around her in a blur of wrought iron balconies and shuttered windows. "You showed up," she continued, "to our anniversary reservation, with another woman, and you're opening with, 'It's not what it looked like'?" He exhaled, a fractured sound. "I forgot about the reservation," he said. "I swear I lost track. The fundraiser, the polling numbers, the schedule is, my head's been—" He trailed off, searching for a word that could transform negligence into something forgivable. She let the silence stretch, counting the beats between them. Somewhere to her right, a busker sang a slow blues, the notes curling around her like smoke. "How long," Amara asked quietly, "have you been seeing her?" For a moment, she could hear only his breathing. Then the faint scrape of his hand across stubble, a habit she knew as well as her own reflection. She pictured him standing just inside the lounge, Lena perhaps now gone, his composure disassembled and scattered at his feet. It wasn't, he stopped, started again. About a year. The words landed with no drama at all. No lightning, no crack of thunder, just a heavy, sinking certainty that slid into place where doubt had once lived. "A year," she repeated, tasting the timeline. A year of speeches in forums, of volunteers in matching shirts, of late nights at headquarters where she'd brought him food and whispered encouragement. A year of her adjusting museum meetings to attend his events, of picking outfits that photographed well at his side. "I didn't mean for it to become," he began. "Don't," she said, cutting gently across him. "Don't insult me by pretending it was an accident. A year is not a slip, Evan. It's a choice you made over and over again." She turned onto a quieter street now, where the crowds thinned and the lamplight fell in softer pools. Here the houses leaned close together, their pastel facades bearing the dignified wear of history. She had walked these blocks countless times on her way to interviews with elders for her cultural history projects. Tonight, each step felt like she was walking beside a different version of herself, the woman she had been when she still believed in the solidity of we. "There were reasons," he said, grasping at the words as if they were lifelines. "You've been so distant. The museum, the exhibits, the travel. We were like ships passing in the night." She stopped walking. "Evan," she said, her tone still soft, but edged now with something tighter. "No, you don't get to rewrite this." He fell silent. "You don't get to cheat for a year and then stand there in a place I chose, at a table with my name on the reservation, and tell me that my work drove you into someone else's arms." Her hand trembled around the phone. She tightened her grip until her knuckles ached. "Do you know how many nights I stayed up reading your policy proposals? How many donors I charmed for you? How many times I rearranged installation schedules to make your events?" "I know you've supported me," he said quickly. "I do. I've always known that. But Lena, her father—" There it was, the undercurrent she had sensed even before tonight. Connections, donors, leverage. "Her father's company funds half the developments on your platform," Amara finished for him. "He bankrolls the very projects you promise will revitalize neighborhoods I grew up studying. You didn't just fall into her bed, Evan. You followed the money there." "That's not fair," he protested. "It's complicated. The campaign needs—" She laughed again, a brittle sound that surprised her by its lightness. "It may be many things," she said, "but it isn't complicated. Complicated is zoning law. Complicated is preserving a neighborhood's soul while letting it grow. This is simple. You wanted power, and you wanted to be wanted. You found both in the same woman and decided I would understand when it was all over and you'd won." He didn't argue. The silence between them felt heavier now. Not empty, but crowded with all the things neither of them had said for far too long. She resumed walking, crossing into a residential street where the noise of the quarter softened to a distant hum. An orange cat watched her from a doorstep, eyes glowing faintly in the lamplight. "Amara," he began again, more quietly, "I don't want to lose you over this. I made a mistake. I got swept up. But you and me, that's the real thing. We can fix this." She thought of the powder room mirror, of the tears that had refused to be tidy, of the years she had swallowed her own disappointments to keep their shared image polished. "Here's what I don't understand," she said slowly. "At what point did I stop being your real thing, Evan? Was it the first time you kissed her? The first night you didn't come home? Or was it when you decided you could bring her into our rituals, into our spaces, and I would still be waiting where you left me?" "That's not how it was," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. She stopped at the corner, leaning lightly against a lamppost. The metal was cool through the thin fabric of her dress. Above her, Spanish moss trailed lazily from the branches of an overhanging oak, catching stray threads of light. "How long?" she asked again, her tone almost conversational now. "Have you known you would bring her tonight?" He hesitated. "A few days," he said at last. "We had the fundraiser downtown, and the lantern was close. I thought it would just be a quick dinner. I swear I didn't remember about the anniversary until I saw you." There, the final fracture. Not just betrayal, but forgetfulness. The date etched into her heart like a carved initial in wet cement had become for him one more thing lost in the shuffle of ambition. "Thank you," she said, surprising him. "For what?" he asked, wary. "For telling the truth, even if you didn't mean to." She straightened, letting her free hand fall to her side. "Here's what's going to happen, Evan. I'm going to go home, my home, for now, and you are going to stay wherever you need to stay tonight. Tomorrow, we can talk about logistics, about what comes next. But I won't be used as your anchor while you weather bad press and donor fallout. I'm not your damage control." "You're my wife," he said, the word landing with a strange, almost desperate emphasis. She let it sit between them, tasting it anew. Wife. A title she had worn like a carefully tailored garment, proudly, comfortably, until tonight revealed how threadbare it had become. "I was," she answered quietly. "I'm not sure what I am to you now, but I know what I still am to myself. And that woman won't go back inside that lounge and pretend this didn't happen." He didn't speak. The silence on his end felt different now, like something collapsing inward. "Amara," he finally whispered. And for the first time, there was no politician in his voice, no future mayor, no strategist. Just a man who had realized too late that some structures, once cracked, don't restore, they transform. "Please." She closed her eyes, letting the word wash over her. Once, it had been the key to her softest places. Tonight, it slid past without catching. "Good night, Evan," she said. Her voice was not cruel, not raised. It was simply final. She ended the call before he could respond, the screen going dark in her hand. The phone felt lighter now, somehow. Or perhaps it was she who had finally acknowledged the weight she'd been carrying. Around her, the city kept breathing. Horns in the distance, a burst of laughter from somewhere down the block. The faint murmur of a saxophone line slipping through an open window. Life, indifferent and generous, continued. Amara slipped the phone back into her clutch and began to walk again, deeper into the night, toward a version of herself who would have to decide what to salvage from the ruins and what to leave behind. New Orleans wrapped itself around Amara like an old familiar shawl, soft in some places, scratchy in others, and always carrying the weight of its stories. The city was a living archive, a place where history breathed through every cracked brick and curling iron balcony. And though her heart felt newly fractured, the streets welcomed her with the same unhurried rhythm she had known since childhood. She walked without destination, letting instinct rather than reason guide her. Her heels clicked along the uneven sidewalks, catching in seams and hollows worn by time. Above her, street lamps cast warm halos that blurred slightly through the remnants of tears she had yet to wipe away completely. The humidity clung to her skin, making the night feel close enough to touch. Just ahead, a distant brass band broke into an exuberant riff, youthful, reckless, spilling joy like it had no idea sorrow lived in the world. Their horns blared one block east, blurring notes that wove through the air like unruly vines. The sound found her, softened her breathing, coaxed her shoulders to relax by mere degrees. New Orleans had always done that, matched her pulse when she needed grounding, lifted her when she needed light. She passed the old tailor shop where her grandmother once worked, hemming shirts for dock workers and custom dresses for debutantes. The storefront had long since been turned into a boutique, with glossy mannequins dressed in linen jumpsuits and gold jewelry. Yet Amara still imagined her grandmother's voice inside, humming hymns while coaxing fabric into elegance. The memory steadied her, anchoring her in lineage rather than loss. Further down, she reached the mural she'd commissioned during her first year as a cultural historian. A vibrant mosaic of musicians and Mardi Gras Indians, painted by young artists she had mentored through after-school programs. The colors glowed even in the dim light, blues and greens catching reflections from passing headlights. She slowed, almost stopping, letting her gaze drift over the faces she knew by heart. The drummer with the shy smile, the girl whose beads formed a halo around her crown. She had helped bring this to life, fought for funding, defended its placement when neighborhood boards scoffed at street art. Now, years later, it remained untouched, protected, respected, loved. This, she thought, was what devotion looked like. Not empty promises whispered behind closed doors. Not anniversaries forgotten, vows diluted by expedience. This, a legacy of color, community, and care, was what lasted. She continued walking, breathing in the layered perfume of the quarter. Chicory coffee, tobacco, river water, spilled rum, fried dough, jasmine. The scents formed a tapestry she recognized in her bones, each thread tied to a memory. Turning on to Dumaine Street, she approached the row of shotgun houses where she had spent her teenage summers. Her mother's laughter drifted back to her, warm, contagious, always slightly mischievous. On Sundays after church, they'd sit on the porch eating watermelon, letting the juice run down their wrists because no one cared about mess on Sundays. Her mother used to say, "A woman with purpose walks a different kind of walk, baby. Even when heartbreak hits, her steps remember where she's going." Tonight, Amara's steps felt unsteady, unsure, but the echo of that voice, steady as drum beats, soft as prayer, kept her moving. She reached Washington Square Park and slipped through the wrought iron gate. The oak trees loomed overhead, draped in Spanish moss that swayed gently in the humid breeze. Couples wandered the paths, dog walkers chatted by the benches, and a group of teenagers practiced dance steps under the glow of a lamppost, laughing each time someone missed the beat. Amara lowered herself onto a bench, smoothing her dress beneath her as she sank into the wood. Her pulse thudded faintly in her ears. The night felt strangely serene, indifferent to her private unraveling. She let her hands fall into her lap and closed her eyes. Evan's shadow rose unbidden, his voice, the stubble on his jaw, the way he said her name like it meant home. The pain came again, sharp and immediate, pressing into the center of her chest. It was astonishing how swiftly love could turn into a wound. For years, she had woven her life through his, stitching together two ambitions, two visions of the future. She had believed in partnership, in compromise, in the quiet work of sustaining something worth having. She had believed, perhaps naively, that they were building a legacy together. But tonight had shown her the truth with brutal clarity. She had been building while he had been drifting. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, cool against her heated cheeks. She opened her eyes and stared at the curved branches silhouetted against the night sky. Something inside her loosened, a small, trembling thread of acceptance. The city had raised her. It had shaped her voice, her passions, her purpose. Long before Evan, long before she ever imagined herself standing at a crossroads with a broken heart. And the city whispered it back to her now, through cicadas and distant horns, and the murmur of late-night wanderers. You were someone before him. You will be someone after him. You are someone now. Amara straightened slowly, letting the words settle into the hollow places. The ache remained, sharp, undeniable, but beneath it something else stirred. Quiet strength, the beginning of new breath, the first hint of a life that might belong entirely to her again. She rose from the bench and walked on. Her pace remained slow, steady, each step a promise to herself. At the corner, the wind picked up, carrying the faint smells of the river, where she would head next. The Mississippi, wide and restless and faithful to no one, not even itself. Yes, she thought, that felt right. She continued toward the water, letting the night carry her forward, letting the city that raised her walk beside her like an old friend who refused to leave her alone in the dark. By the time Amara reached the Mississippi River, the night had shifted from humid velvet to something cooler and sharper. The water lapped against the stone embankment with slow, unhurried breaths, as though the river itself were contemplating her pain. She leaned against the railing, watching the ripples catch the faint reflections of passing riverboats. Their lanterns shimmered across the surface like scattered pieces of a broken crown, beautiful even in their fragmentation. She stayed until the ache in her feet reminded her she had walked farther than she intended, until the breeze turned gentler, brushing against her skin like a whispered encouragement to go home, wherever home would mean after tonight. Her museum keycard felt heavier than usual in her pocket when she stepped through the staff entrance. The building stood quiet at this hour, its galleries slumbering beneath domes of shadow. No murmuring visitors, no clicking heels across polished floors, only stillness. The kind of stillness that invited confession. The security guard looked up from his desk, startled to see her so late. "Evening, Dr. Lewis," he murmured, concern flickering in his eyes. She offered a soft smile, more a courtesy than an emotion. Just picking up a few things, but they both knew the museum had always been more than a workplace for her. It had been sanctuary, archive, confessional booth, home. Her office waited on the second floor, where tall windows overlooked the courtyard fountain and the moonlit wisteria climbing its stone columns. She closed the door softly behind her, letting the familiar scent of old books, linen-bound journals, and faint sandalwood calm the frayed edges of her nerves. The room held traces of her life's work, photographs from restoration trips, piles of annotated manuscripts, sketches from community artists she'd mentored. Everything here reflected who she was when no one else demanded a version of her. This space had never lied to her. It did not tonight. She slipped off her heels, sinking into the plush rug beneath her desk. Her laptop woke with a soft glow, illuminating her face with pale light. For a moment, she simply stared at the blank search bar, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. She hated this feeling, the intrusion into someone else's life, the quiet descent into a kind of voyeurism she had never believed herself capable of. Yet here she was, trembling slightly, searching for answers that her husband should have given willingly, searching because truth mattered more than pride. She typed the name, Lena Walsh. The search results bloomed instantly, an archive of images, articles, interviews, news clips. Lena's world was public, polished, curated. In the first photograph, Lena stood beside a cluster of campaign volunteers, all wearing branded t-shirts. She was smiling, wide, bright, undeniably charismatic. The kind of smile that gathered attention like bees to nectar. Amara clicked deeper. A video interview revealed Lena speaking with animated precision about voter outreach and generational engagement. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who believed she belonged in every room she entered. Amara exhaled shakily. It wasn't Lena's beauty that unsettled her, though she was undeniably lovely. It was the certainty in her expression, the effortless belief that ambition was not something to be apologized for. A familiar ache threads through Amara's chest. She had once worn that expression too, before years of balancing her brilliance with domestic harmony had taught her to soften her edges, to be accommodating, to prioritize Evan's rising star over the shine of her own. Image after image told a story none of them knew they were telling. Evan and Lena at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Evan and Lena reviewing documents in a cafe. Evan and Lena laughing during a town hall rehearsal. The worst ones were the almosts, the photographs where their hands nearly touched, where their bodies leaned infinitesimally toward each other, not yet lovers, but no longer colleagues. The dangerous territory between. But then she found it, a picture from a donor's gala 2 months earlier. Evan stood behind Lena, just slightly, and his gaze, oh, that gaze, was fixed on her with a quiet intensity Amara recognized instantly. It was the look he once reserved only for her in the early years. The look that said he was captivated, moved, compelled. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing through the sting. This wasn't impulsive. This had been unfolding slowly, inevitably, with its own gravitational pull. Amara scrolled further. A feature article highlighted Lena's background. Daughter of a real estate developer known for his influence in Gulf Coast infrastructure projects. Connected, strategic, financially powerful. A realization crept over Amara like a cold tide. Lena hadn't just been a romantic entanglement or a reckless flirtation. She had been a political asset, a move on the board, a gateway to a world Evan wanted and was willing to betray for. Her pulse quickened, a mix of fury and grief threading through her veins. Betrayal was one thing, manipulation was another. And manipulation disguised as affection, that was cruelty. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, pushing her glasses up to rub the bridge of her nose. The world came back into focus in soft edges, her office glowing with the quiet dignity of a life curated from integrity, not shortcuts. She clicked open Lena's public social media next. More images, more events, more moments that should never have been shared. And then, unmistakably, Evan's hand on Lena's lower back at a policy luncheon. An intimate, familiar gesture that made Amara's stomach clench. Her fingers stilled. She studied the photograph, but not in the way she studied archival pieces or ancient artifacts. This wasn't academic. This was personal, painfully, humiliatingly personal. She had spent her career preserving truth, uncovering it, contextualizing it, honoring it. Yet in her own home, truth had been twisted, packaged, and hidden from her like she didn't deserve it. A soft knock broke through the quiet. Amara startled slightly before calling, "Come in." The door opened a crack. It was Marisol, her closest friend, her chosen sister, standing there with her hair wrapped in a bright indigo scarf, wearing paint-stained overalls. Her expression softened instantly when she saw Amara's face. "Mara," she whispered, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Amara didn't try to compose herself, didn't plaster on the gentle smile she used for journalists or donors. She simply breathed out a shuddering exhale, watching Marisol walk toward her. "He's been seeing her for a year," Amara said softly, the words falling like fragile glass between them. Marisol didn't gasp. She didn't rush to outrage or declarations. She simply sat beside Amara on the floor, their shoulders touching, and whispered, "Then we start by telling the truth, your truth, the one he tried to rewrite." Amara swallowed, her throat thick. "So," Marisol murmured, gently closing the laptop, "what do you want to know next?" Amara rested her head against the wall, eyes half closed. "Everything," she whispered. "I want to know everything." And in the quiet sanctuary of her office, the one place Evan had never truly understood, Amara prepared to reclaim the narrative he thought he had the power to control. The museum rested in a hush so complete it seemed to cradle Amara in a protective cocoon. Outside her office window, the courtyard fountain whispered its endless stream, the sound rising and falling in a rhythm that soothed without asking permission. She had tucked her feet beneath her on the floor beside Marisol, their shoulders leaning into one another in quiet solidarity. The world beyond that room, the betrayal, the images she had forced herself to study, the ache curling through her ribs, felt distant for a moment, muted, manageable only because she was no longer alone with it. Then came the second knock, more insistent this time, firmer, familiar. Amara exchanged a look with Marisol, half confusion, half fatigue. "Who else knows I'm here?" she murmured. Marisol raised a brow. "I told no one." Which meant only one person could have found her this quickly. The door opened before either of them could respond. Zoe Lewis swept inside like a force of nature contained within a sharply tailored pantsuit. Her sister always moved with purpose, no step wasted, no gesture uncertain. Tonight was no different, though her entrance carried an urgency that bordered on fierce protectiveness. "Baby," Zoe said softly, breath catching as her eyes landed on Amara sitting barefoot on the floor, hairpins loosened from her chignon, mascara smudged faintly beneath her eyes. "Oh, Amar." The nickname, used only in childhood, struck something deep inside her. Amara pressed her lips together, trying to steady the sudden tumble of emotion. But Zoe was already kneeling beside her, the tailored suit folding inelegantly at the knees, as if dignity meant nothing where her sister's pain was involved. Zoe cupped Amara's cheeks, thumbs brushing gently across still damp skin. "Who do we need to fight?" she asked, voice low, controlled, dangerous. A tear Amara had thought she'd wrung out hours ago found its way free. Marisol answered softly on her behalf. "Evan." Zoe's jaw tightened. "I knew it." "You knew?" Amara whispered. Zoe sat back a little, but remained close enough that their knees touched, grounding her. "Not the specifics, but I've seen the way he's been stretched thin. The arrogance creeping into his tone when he talks about the campaign. The way he stopped asking how your work was going." Her eyes softened, her voice trembling only a fraction. "I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. I just didn't want it to drop on you." Amara let her sister's words wash over her. Truths spoken without cruelty, only care. "How did you find me?" she finally asked. Zoe glanced at Marisol with a knowing smirk. "Our girl Marisol texted me a single word. Emergency. And you know I move when she moves." Marisol shrugged with a small smile. Sisterhood protocol. Despite the heaviness in her chest, Amara managed the ghost of a smile. She looked from one woman to the other, two pillars in her life. One born into her world, one chosen for it. They had always formed a small but unbreakable constellation around her. Tonight, they seemed even brighter. Zoe reached for Amara's hand. "Tell me everything." For a moment, Amara hesitated. Speaking the truth made it more real, more irreversible. But Zoe squeezed her fingers once, steady, firm, a silent, "I've got you." And the resistance melted away. She inhaled, shakily, He brought her tonight. Both women stiffened. At the Maroney Lantern, Amara continued, our anniversary dinner, a table I reserved 3 weeks ago. Her voice shook on the last words, fragile as cracked porcelain. Marisol let out a low, agonized sound. Zoe swore under her breath, a rare, raw slip. He said he forgot, Amara added. Our anniversary. Forgot. Zoe's eyes darkened with a fury so controlled it hummed. You don't forget 10 years with a woman like you. You choose not to remember. But that's not all, Marisol murmured, voice gentle but tight. He's been seeing her for a year, and her father is, well, connected. Zoe's head snapped toward Marisol. How connected? Real estate, infrastructure, major campaign donor influence. A slow exhale escaped Zoe, the kind that signaled a shift from sisterly rage to strategic calculation. So this wasn't just an affair, she said quietly. It was an investment. Amara flinched, not visibly, but enough that both women felt it. Zoe slid closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. You listen to me, she said softly, the power in her voice tempered by tenderness. His decisions do not define your worth. His ambition does not eclipse your brilliance. And his betrayal does not diminish the tenacity you carry in your bones. Marisol nodded, dark eyes burning with empathy. You are Amara Lewis. You curate history. You uplift communities. You resurrect forgotten voices. You are not some ornament for his political rise. Amara closed her eyes, leaning into her sister's shoulder. I feel so foolish, she whispered. No, Zoe said sharply, pulling back just enough to meet her gaze. He's the one who should feel foolish. You loved him honestly. You trusted him. That's not a weakness. That's a goodness. And good people are not foolish. They are precious. The words settled into Amara like a balm she hadn't known she needed. Marisol reached for her hand from the other side. And you are not going through this alone. We're here, tonight, tomorrow, for however long you need. A silence fell between them, a soft, steady silence filled with presence rather than emptiness. After several moments, Zoe rose gracefully to her feet and offered both women her hands. Stand up, she said firmly. We're not doing this part on the floor. Amara allowed herself to be pulled up. Her legs trembled slightly, but with two hands steadying her, she remained upright. Zoe reached over to smooth a curl that had fallen from Amara's updo. You're allowed to break, she whispered, but you are not allowed to break alone. The betrayal remained. The grief remained. The shock pulsed alongside them. But in the warmth of these two women, the pain found a boundary. It would not drown her tonight. It would not swallow her whole. Marisol stepped toward the bookshelf and retrieved a small blanket Amara kept for long research nights. She draped it gently around Amara's shoulders. Let's get you home, she murmured. Your real home, at least until we figure out the next move. Zoe nodded. And tomorrow, we talk strategy. Amara felt her breath settle deeper in her chest. For the first time since the lounge, she felt the faintest flicker of safety. She gathered her bag, slipping her laptop inside. As they walked out of her office together, three silhouettes framed by museum lights, Amara realized something vital. She might have lost her marriage tonight, but she had not lost her world. Not the parts that truly mattered. The night did not so much end as thin out, fading from the velvet density of crisis into the fragile gray of exhaustion. Zoe and Marisol brought Amara back to Zoe's townhouse in mid-city, a narrow, sun-faded building with creaking floors and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of coffee and nutmeg. They made her tea she didn't drink. They laid a quilt over her shoulders she barely felt. They spoke in hushed tones in the next room, voices rising and falling like waves, while Amara sat on the sofa and stared at a crack in the ceiling she had never noticed before. Her phone buzzed. Again. Evan Whitfield. Evan Whitfield. Evan Whitfield. Missed calls stacked one upon another, a digital insistence refusing to let the night settle. Eventually, he stopped calling and began texting instead. Mara, please. I need to explain. I know how it looked, but you don't understand the full story. We can't let this destroy everything we built." Amara read each message with a strange detachment, as if they were lines from someone else's play. It struck her with a kind of weary curiosity that even now his language circled back to we, to everything we built, as though the foundation hadn't already been splintered by his own hands. She set the phone face down on the coffee table. Zoe came in carrying a glass of water and eyed the device like it were a venomous thing. "Is he still harassing you?" Amara shook her head lightly. "He's attempting to explain." Marisol leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her gaze soft but unyielding. "Of course he is. Men like that always think the right speech can fix what their actions shattered." "What do you want to do?" Zoe asked, settling beside her, placing the water within easy reach but not pressing it on her. The question felt enormous. Amara closed her eyes briefly. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I just know I can't hear his voice again tonight. Not without losing something I still need." "Then you won't," Zoe said simply. "Not tonight." So Amara turned her phone off for the first time in years, not for a flight, not for a meeting, but for herself. The silence that followed was almost shocking. No buzzing, no flashing names, just her breath, her sister's warmth at her side, and the low murmur of a ceiling fan turning its sleepy circles. Sleep came slowly and in pieces. When it finally arrived, it brought dreams that felt like fragments of stained glass, sharp and shimmering, beautiful and cruel. She woke at dawn with a hollow ache behind her eyes, and the heaviness of a decision not yet made pressing on her chest. By morning, the world had already begun to move around her story. While Zoe brewed coffee, her phone lit up with notifications the moment she turned it on. News alerts, campaign updates, a local gossip account speculating about a scene at the Marigny Lantern. No names yet, just hints. But it was New Orleans. Names would surface soon. And when they did, she would not be the one who looked surprised. A new text blinked onto the screen, time-stamped 6:07 a.m. "Meet me at your office at 11. Please, Mara. I'll be there whether you answer or not. We owe ourselves a conversation in person." She stared at the words for a long moment. The old Amara might have gone alone, might have allowed him to set the terms, to tell his story, to coax her into an uneasy truce in the name of history, stability, familiarity. But that version of herself had walked out of the Marigny Lantern and shattered in a powder room mirror. She typed a single reply. "If you come, you will not speak to me alone." His answer arrived almost immediately. "Whatever you need." It was, she thought, the first true sentence he had given her since the night began. The museum felt different in daylight after such a night, as if the building itself were watching her more closely, aware that the woman who walked its halls this morning was not quite the same one who had left it last evening. Staff greeted her with their usual warmth, but their eyes lingered a fraction longer. Rumors traveled quickly, even when words did not. Zoe and Marisol flanked her like sentinels as they moved toward her office. Zoe had taken the day off from the firm without hesitation. Marisol had postponed a studio session. They moved in step, three women bound by blood, choice, and circumstance. "Remember," Zoe murmured as they reached the door, "you are not here to be persuaded. You are here to be informed." "And to let him see," Marisol added quietly, "that you are no longer standing alone in his shadow." Amara's hand hovered over the doorknob. She drew in a breath, felt it catch on the edges of fear and pride, then turned the handle. Evan was already there. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched in an uncharacteristic slouch. In the bright morning light, he looked less like the polished candidate whose image appeared on billboards, and more like the man she had first met at a panel on urban equity. Earnest, ambitious, edges still raw. But time had layered something else atop that boyishness. Entitlement, perhaps. Or the assumption that his sincerity could excuse his missteps. He turned at the sound of the door and froze when he saw the trio. "Amara," he began, taking a step forward, then halted as his gaze flicked to Zoe and Marisol. A faint crease appeared between his brows. "I thought—" "I told you," Amara said gently, "I would not speak to you alone." Zoe closed the door with a quiet click and leaned against it, arms folded. Marisol moved to stand near the bookshelf, close enough that Amara could feel her presence without needing to look. For a moment, no one spoke. Evan's eyes found Amara again. His expression softened into something like grief. "You look tired," he said. The comment, once intimate, now felt oddly intrusive. She let it pass. "What is it you need to explain?" she asked, her voice calm, almost academic. He ran a hand through his hair, the familiar, anxious gesture. "Mara, I'm messed up," he said. "I know that. I'm not here to deny it. I just need you to understand how it happened." "You mean," Zoe interjected quietly, "you want to control the narrative?" Evan's jaw tightened. "Zoe, with respect," she echoed, "you lost the right to ask my sister for private audiences when you walked into her anniversary dinner with another woman." Marisol's eyes flickered with a dark, quiet satisfaction at Zoe's precision. Amara lifted a hand slightly. "Let him speak," she said. "I want to hear what story he's been telling himself." Evan swallowed, nodding once. "It started with the campaign," he said, "with pressure, expectations. We were underwater. Numbers, strategy, funding. Lena came in with fresh ideas, with energy. She understood the donors, the messaging. Her father," he hesitated, glancing at Zoe, "opened doors I'd been knocking on for years." "And this?" Amara asked. "Seduced you?" He closed his eyes briefly. "It wasn't just that." His gaze searched her face, as though looking for traces of the woman who used to soften at his vulnerabilities. "You were so consumed with your exhibition, with traveling, with research. Whenever we were together, it felt like you were already halfway gone, to archives, to artists, to another city. Lena, she was there. She made me feel seen." There it was, the old indictment, dressed in wounded tones. Amara felt Zoe shift beside the door, bristling, but she lifted her hand again, silencing the interruption. "So," she said slowly, "while I was working to preserve the stories of women erased from history, you were writing me out of my own marriage." His face crumpled. "That's not what I wanted. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that after the election, things would settle, that we'd find our way back. I compartmentalized. Maybe I convinced myself that if I didn't admit it to you, it wasn't real." "Real enough," Marisol murmured, "to humiliate her in public." He flinched. "I forgot the reservation," he said, almost to himself. "I swear to you, Amara, I did. When I saw you there," his voice broke slightly, "I realized how badly I'd let everything tangle." "Tangle," Zoe repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "You mean you chose to stack lies until they toppled on her?" Evan's composure faltered. "I am not asking for your forgiveness today," he said, turning back to Amara. I'm begging you not to let this be the end of us. We've built a life together, a home, a history. Don't throw it away over a year," Amara said softly. "You're asking me not to throw away 10 years over the year you spent desecrating them." The word hung sharp and cold between them. He took a step toward her, stopping short when he sensed, rather than saw, Zoe straighten at the door. "I love you," he said, desperation edging his voice. "Whatever confused, selfish, terrible choices I've made, that has always been true. Once, that admission would have undone her. Once, love had been the magic word that smoothed over sharp edges, that taught her to compromise, to forgive, to fold herself smaller so the union could remain intact. Now, she heard it differently. If this is love," she said quietly, "it is a kind I can no longer survive." His eyes shone, and for the first time since the night began, She saw something in them that resembled true remorse. Not just at being caught, not just at the fallout, but at the harm done. But remorse, she knew, did not rewind time. Evan, she continued, her voice gaining steadiness, you did not simply mess up. You made deliberate choices to lie, to conceal, to use another woman's body and father's money to fuel your ambition, while expecting me to hold our life steady in the background. That isn't a tangle. That's architecture. You built that. He swallowed hard. Is there any path, he asked, that leads back? Silence filled the room like water. Amara looked at him, the man she had once believed would be her greatest ally. She saw the boys she had met, the partners she had loved, and the strangers she had discovered in the glow of restaurant candlelight. All of them stood before her now in one body, weighted by his own choices. I don't know yet what path I'm on, she said at last. But I know it doesn't begin with pretending this is something we can patch over with apologies and speeches. His shoulders sagged. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the force he'd underestimated was not scandal or donors or public perception. It was her. Zoe stepped forward then, placing a hand lightly on Amara's shoulder. This conversation is over for today, she said, gentler now. Amara has work to do. And so do you, if you're serious about confronting the man who let this happen. Evan nodded slowly, eyes never leaving Amara's face. If you'll let me, he said hoarsely, I'll keep trying to make this right, even if you never take me back. I owe you that much. She didn't answer. There was no answer yet. He left the room with one last, lingering look, a silent question that would no longer be hers to solve. When the door closed behind him, the air seemed to shift. Amara's knees weakened, and Zoe immediately guided her to the chair behind her desk. Marisol moved to the window, exhaling a breath she seemed to have been holding the entire time. How do you feel? Zoe asked. Amara stared at the empty space where Evan had stood moments before. The ache remained, but beneath it something unexpected flickered. Like I just walked out of a burning house, she said softly, and for the first time, I can smell my own skin instead of the smoke. By late morning, the museum had slipped into its usual choreography, docents guiding school groups with patient gestures, curators moving through galleries with laser-focused purpose, the distant hum of air conditioning keeping the Louisiana heat politely at bay. From the outside, nothing had changed. The banners for Amara's upcoming exhibition, Unseen Lines, Black Women and the Making of Modern Art, still fluttered proudly from the facade, their bold colors catching the sunlight. Inside, however, the air felt denser, charged with the invisible electricity of gossip and concern. News traveled quickly in a city that lived on stories. By the time Amara stepped into the corridor leading to the boardroom, she had already sensed it, not in overt stares, but in the subtle quiet when she passed, the soft shifts of bodies making space for her, the way conversations dimmed as if in deference. Her phone vibrated in her hand with another alert from a local blog. Speculation swirls around a high-profile couple after witnesses report a tense scene at the Maroney Lantern. Names still withheld. For now. Amara silenced the screen and slipped the device into her bag. She would not let her worth rise and fall with each speculative paragraph. Zoe walked beside her, the steady cadence of her heels matching Amara's steps. At the boardroom door, she stopped. I'll wait outside, Zoe murmured, squeezing her hand. This is your arena, but I'll be close enough if anyone tries something foolish. The warmth in that simple promise, I will not leave you undefended, moved through Amara like a quiet blessing. She took a breath, smoothed the front of her dress, and stepped into the boardroom. The space was grand, without being ostentatious. A long mahogany table stretched beneath a chandelier whose crystals caught the light in fractured rainbows. Tall windows overlooked the courtyard where the fountain played its steady song. Around the table sat a carefully curated collection of philanthropy, influence, and taste, longtime donors, business magnates, a sprinkling of artists, and a handful of community leaders who had fought their way into a seat. At the head of the table sat Daniel St. Clair, the museum's director, his silver hair impeccably combed, his expression composed. He rose when he saw her. "Dr. Lewis," he said, voice warm but formal, "thank you for making time on such short notice." Amara nodded, feeling every pair of eyes on her. Some held genuine admiration, others held worry, and a few, she noted with a detached sort of curiosity, held something akin to hunger, the kind that thrived on other people's crises. She moved to her usual seat, spine straight, breath measured. On the screen at the far end of the room, the opening slide of her presentation waited. A sepia-toned photograph of a black woman painter in a modest studio, gaze sharp and unflinching, brush mid-stroke. One of Amara's favorites. An artist history had nearly erased. How fitting, she thought, that she'll witness this too. When the introductions and formalities were done, Daniel gestured toward the screen. "Let's begin with the exhibition update," he said. "I believe we are all eager to hear how preparations are progressing." Amara stood, hands resting lightly on the back of her chair for a moment, before she stepped toward the projector's glow. As she spoke, the room transformed, not in reality, but in her perception. The tension that had wrapped around her shoulders like a lead shawl began to loosen, replaced by something more familiar, more solid. This was her terrain: stories, context, aesthetics, justice. She walked the board through the exhibition's narrative arc. The early innovators who painted in borrowed corners and cramped kitchens. The sculptors whose work was misattributed or dismissed as craft. The photographers who recorded their communities with eye-level tenderness long before larger institutions paid attention. Her voice, initially steady by force of will, soon became steady by nature. As slides shifted, archival photographs, early sketches, restored canvases, her passion wove itself into every sentence. She spoke of erasure without rancor, only clarity, of brilliance without spectacle, only reverence. By the time she reached the final slide, a contemporary triptych by a living artist whose work crackled with color and defiance, the room had grown noticeably quieter. The kind of quiet that signaled not boredom, but attention. Amara clicked the projector to black and folded her hands gently. "In 3 weeks," she concluded, "these galleries will hold not only art, but correction, recognition, a rebalancing of a story that should never have been so one-sided. Our donors, our visitors, our city, they deserve to see the full picture. And these women deserve at last to be seen as they truly were. Architects of movements, not footnotes to them." For a heartbeat, there was no response. Then Genevieve Duplass, an elder patron whose family had funded half the museum's expansions in the last 30 years, leaned forward. "Magnificent," she said simply. "Truly." A ripple of agreement moved around the table, murmurs of impressive, timely, important. A few of the younger board members exchanged looks that glowed with genuine excitement. Only after that wave settled did Daniel clear his throat softly. "Thank you, Dr. Lewis," he said. "As always, your vision elevates this institution." He paused, fingers tapping lightly against his folder. "Now, before we conclude, there is one more matter we must address." The room shifted, postures straightened, expressions tightened almost imperceptibly. Here it was. The other reason for this hastily called meeting. "As you all know," Daniel continued carefully, "our museum does not exist in a vacuum. We are part of a citywide ecosystem of politics, philanthropy, and public opinion. Recent events involving Councilman Whitfield have begun circulating in certain media channels." Eyes flicked toward Amara, then away, then back again. She kept her gaze neutral, chin lifted. "We value both Dr. Lewis's leadership and the institution's reputation," Daniel went on. "So I wanted to open the floor briefly to questions or concerns regarding how this may affect the upcoming exhibition and gala." An uncomfortable hush settled. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, Malcolm Pierce, a tech entrepreneur turned patron, leaned forward. "To be blunt," he said, "if certain blogs are correct and Councilman Whitfield's personal indiscretions become public knowledge, It could create noise. Many of our major donors move in those same circles. Genevieve sniffed delicately. When have they not moved in noisy circles? A soft chuckle fluttered around the table, easing the tension a fraction. But we can't ignore it, said another board member, a polished woman with a string of pearls and a wary gaze. If the story escalates, reporters may frame the gala as some sort of theater for scandal. Our museum could become backdrop instead of focus. Amara listened, allowing each concern to land without burrowing under her skin. They weren't wrong. Institutions like this lived closely with perception. She knew that, had shaped that, had navigated it for years. But this was also her life they were dissecting. Her heart reduced to noise, her grief flattened into frame. When Daniel finally turned to her, eyes apologetic but expectant, she was ready. "Dr. Lewis," he said, "would you like to address this?" She rose slowly, placing her palms lightly on the table's polished surface. The wood reflected a faint, blurred version of her face. It was a relief to lift her gaze above it and find her own eyes, unwavering. "What has happened in my personal life," she began, voice calm and measured, "is undeniably painful. And yes, some of it may soon play out in the public sphere. This city cherishes its stories, especially the messy ones." A few board members smiled, acknowledging the truth without denying its edge. "But let me be very clear," she continued, her tone softening, not hardening. "The exhibition we are opening in 3 weeks is not about me. It is not about Councilman Whitfield or his campaign or any orbiting drama." She glanced toward the darkened screen, as if she could still see the ghostly outlines of the women she had just invoked. "It is about artists who created under restraints most of us can't fathom. Women who painted knowing their names might never appear on the wall labels. Photographers whose work was published without credit. Sculptors whose ideas were claimed by men whose names history preserved instead." She let the weight of that settle. "This institution," she said, looking each board member in the eye, "has an opportunity to make a statement, not about scandal, but about priorities. We can choose to let gossip dictate our schedule, or we can choose to keep our focus where it belongs, on art, on truth, on community." Genevieve sat back, eyes gleaming. "Bravo," she murmured. "If there are specific concerns about donor relations," Amara added, more gently now, "I am willing to meet with them, to reassure them that the museum's work remains steady even when personal lives do not. But I will not hide this exhibition or myself because someone else failed to honor their commitments." Daniel's lips curved into a subtle, approving smile. "Well said," he replied quietly. Silence followed, but it felt different now. Less tense, more contemplative. The polished woman with pearls, who had spoken earlier, cleared her throat. "Dr. Lewis," she said, "I confess I was worried we might need to postpone the gala, but hearing you speak, I realize there is a certain poetry in this moment, an exhibition about women whose contributions were overshadowed, opening at a time when your own light could easily be eclipsed by someone else's poor choices." She paused, a hint of softened warmth entering her gaze. "I would rather stand on the side of the women who insist on being seen." A murmur of agreement circled the table, quiet but sincere. Malcolm nodded. "As far as I'm concerned, we keep the date. If the press asks, we redirect. This night is about art, period." Genevieve lifted her hand with a regal flick of the wrist. "Let the city gossip," she declared. "It will anyway. Meanwhile, we will hang these works, open these doors, and remind people why museums exist in the first place." The motion, unspoken but understood, was carried by the room. Daniel closed his folder softly. "Then it's settled," he said. "The exhibition opens as planned. The gala proceeds. And Dr. Lewis," he inclined his head, "continues to lead us with the same clarity and courage she has always shown." Something loosened in Amara's chest, a knot she hadn't known was there. She'd come prepared to defend her work, perhaps even her place. Instead, she found, if not unanimous understanding, then at least a meaningful majority willing to stand beside her. When the meeting adjourned and chairs scraped back from the table, Daniel caught her arm gently as she passed. "For what it's worth," he said in a low voice, meant only for her, "I'm sorry your private life is being dragged into the spotlight, but I am grateful, deeply, that you are choosing to stand in it on your own terms." She met his gaze, eyes soft. "I don't know any other way," she replied. Outside the boardroom, Zoe straightened from where she'd been leaning against the wall, a question already in her eyes. "Well?" she asked. Amara let out a slow breath that felt, astonishingly, like relief. "They're standing with the exhibition," she said. "With me too. At least enough." Zoe's shoulders eased. "Good," she said. "Then while he tries to save his polls, you'll be busy changing history." Amara glanced down the sunlit corridor toward the galleries where her artists waited. Silent, patient, brilliant. And though the world around her might buzz with speculation, inside these walls, she knew exactly who she was and what she had come here to do. The boardroom emptied into murmurs and the soft friction of designer souls on polished floors. When the door finally closed behind the last patron, the corridor outside felt strangely still, as if the museum were exhaling with her. Zoe walked beside Amara in silence, not pressing, not prodding, just matching her pace. At the turn toward the modern galleries, she paused. "I'll head back to the firm," she said. "I've already stretched my urgent personal matter explanation farther than most partners tolerate." Her mouth curved wryly. "Text me if anything shifts, or if you just need me to sit and glare at someone." Amara smiled, small but genuine. "You glare very well." "It's a family gift," Zoe replied, leaning in to press a kiss to her sister's temple. "Remember, you are not the story they're all whispering about. You're the one writing it." Then she was gone, the click of her heels fading toward the elevator. Amara turned toward the modern wing, letting the familiar rhythm of work pull her forward. The galleries buzzed with preparation, the soft whir of drills, hushed exchanges between installers, the occasional scrape of a crate being nudged into place. It was the music of creation, and it soothed her like nothing else could. As she approached the entrance to Unseen Lines, one of the junior curators, Malika, hurried toward her, cheeks flushed. "Dr. Lewis," she said, slightly out of breath, "there's someone at the staff entrance asking for you. She didn't have an appointment, but she—" Malika hesitated, eyes flicking to Amara's face. "She insisted." Amara's first thought was Evan, and a tired, brittle resistance rose in her chest. "I told her you were in a meeting," Malika continued quickly. "But she said she would wait. She seems nervous but determined." "Did she give a name?" Amara asked. Malika nodded. "Lena Walsh." The world did not tilt. The lights did not dim. Nothing so dramatic. Instead, a curious stillness settled over Amara. The name, spoken plainly in daylight, felt different than it had in the dark of the lounge. Less like a specter and more like a person. A woman, flesh infallible, ensnared in the same architecture of Evan's choices. "Where is she?" Amara asked. "No," Amara said calmly. "It's all right. Thank you, Malika." She walked through the back corridors with measured steps, the institutional carpeting soft beneath her feet. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, their pale glow a far cry from the warm intimacy of the Marigny lantern. Here, everything was honest in its harshness. Outside the glass window of the conference room, Amara caught her first clear sight of Lena Walsh. She was seated at the small table, back straight but shoulders tense, hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. In the unforgiving office light, she looked younger than she had in campaign photos, less polished, more human. A loose strand of hair had escaped the sleek twist at the nape of her neck, curling rebelliously against her cheek. As if sensing movement, Lena looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Amara opened the door and stepped inside. "Miss Walsh," she said, voice cool but not sharp. "You asked to see me." Lena stood quickly, almost knocking her chair back. Dr. Lewis, she said, her tone carefully respectful. Thank you for agreeing. I know this is I know I have no right to ask for your time. Amara closed the door softly behind her and remained standing. She could feel her own heartbeat, steady but present, a metronome underscoring the moment. What can I do for you? She asked. Lena swallowed. Up close, the traces of a sleepless night were visible beneath her concealer. The faint shadows, the fine creases at the corners of her mouth. I wanted to apologize, Lena began, the words rushing out in a tumble. And to explain, not to excuse, nothing excuses what's happened, but to give you information you deserve. Because I realized last night that I have been living in a story I didn't write, and I suspect you have too. There was something in that phrasing, a familiar sting, that made Amara's fingers tighten around the back of a chair. Go on, she said quietly. Lena took a breath as if steadying herself on a precipice. When I met Evan, she said, he told me he was separated. He said you and he were keeping things quiet until after the election, to avoid bad press. That you were still sharing a house for optics and stability, but romantically finished. Her gaze did not waver from Amara's face. He framed it as a mutual agreement, a mature, strategic decision. The words landed like small, precise blows, less shattering than confirming, pieces falling into a pattern she no longer had the luxury of disbelieving. He told me you both still attended events together, Lena continued, but only because certain donors expected to see a united front. He said you understood, that you were kind, supportive, that you wanted what was best for his career, even if the marriage was over. A humorless smile touched Amara's lips. A flattering myth, she said softly. I suppose I should be grateful. Color rose in Lena's cheeks. I believed him, she whispered, not because I'm naive, though perhaps I am, but because he's very good at sounding like the man he wants to be. Amara said nothing. She knew that truth too well. For months, Lena went on, voice fraying, I told myself I wasn't that woman, the one who helps destroy a marriage. I thought I was with someone whose marriage had already died quietly, in private. I thought you were a chapter he was closing with care. And last night? Amara asked. Lena's composure flickered, then steadied. Last night, she said, I watched him walk into a room and turn to stone when he saw you. He didn't look like a man encountering an ex-wife. He looked like a man caught in a lie. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a raw honesty. When I saw your face, I understood. Not everything, but enough. I realized I had been living in a carefully crafted half-truth, and that you, her voice caught, you had been given even less. Silence unfurled between them, dense but not hostile. The hum of the building's systems filled the edges of it. Amara studied Lena's face. It would have been so easy to pour her fury into this young woman, to let her become the vessel for all the humiliation and hurt. But looking at her now, shoulders tight with shame, Amara saw not a villain, but another woman whose trust had been manipulated, whose desire to believe had been weaponized. How long, Amara asked, have you known his relationship with me was not what he said? Lena exhaled. Truly known? Since last night. Suspected? She shook her head. Maybe a few weeks. Little things. The way he flinched when someone referred to you as his wife. The fact that he never talked about the logistics of the separation, only its usefulness. You didn't ask? There was no accusation in Amara's tone, only genuine curiosity. I did, Lena said quietly. Sometimes. He would deflect, say the legal stuff was messy, that he didn't want to drag you into conversation. He'd distract me with campaign crises, with plans for the future. And I, her shoulders sagged. I let myself be distracted. Amara thought of how often she too had been distracted. By his dreams, by their joint plans, by the image of them as a team. Erasure, she knew, did not only happen on museum walls. It happened in kitchens, in bedrooms, in hearts. Why are you here, Lena? she asked, voice gentler now. Truly. Lena met her gaze, eyes bright with unshed tears. Because I refuse to let him be the only author of this story, she said. Because you deserve to know that he lied to us both. And because I am removing myself from the campaign, from his life, from this city if I have to. Amara's brows lifted. You're leaving? My father's firm is pulling their support from his projects, Lena replied, a tremor in her voice that was not triumph, but grief. I told him what happened. He may not understand everything, but he understands exploitation. Evan built a strategy on my family's money and your loyalty. My father won't stand for that. A strange, cool clarity spread through Amara. Evan's careful architecture was collapsing, not just at home, but in the public, professional sphere he'd prized above all else. I'm resigning as his strategist, Lena said, and I'm moving back to Houston for a while. I need to remember who I am when I'm not orbiting someone else's ascent. For the first time, Amara felt a flicker of something toward this woman that wasn't pain. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was recognition. Solidarity forged in a fire neither of them had lit. Did you love him? Amara heard herself ask, surprised by the intimacy of the question. Lena's lips curved in a small, bitter smile. I loved the future he promised, she said. The version of myself reflected in his ambition. I realize now that I was just another carefully placed piece on his board. She hesitated, then added, I think he loved you, or the idea of you, enough that he never fully let you go. And that might be the cruelest part of all. The words slid into Amara with a painful truth. Love, half-lived, half-hoarded, weaponized through a mission. Thank you for coming, Amara said quietly, for telling me what you did not have to. Lena nodded, blinking back tears that finally spilled over. I know my apology doesn't erase anything, she whispered, but I needed you to hear it from me. I did not enter this knowingly, and I will not remain in it now that I do. For a moment, Amara considered stepping forward, offering a physical gesture of comfort. But the space between them felt sacred in its own way, a respectful distance between two women standing among the rubble of the same man's mistakes. Take care of yourself, Amara said instead. And when you walk away from this, don't forget, your story is bigger than his. Lena's breath hitched. She nodded once, then turned toward the door. As she disappeared down the corridor, Amara remained standing in the quiet room, listening to the fading echo of her footsteps. She felt no triumph, no vindication. What she felt instead was a deep, bone-level understanding of the patterns that had been at work, how charm, ambition, and charisma could bend entire lives into shapes that served one person's narrative. And beneath that understanding, like a seed pressing against the soil, she felt something else. An unwavering resolve that the next chapter of her life would be authored with a sharper pen, a firmer hand, and a devotion to truth that extended not only to the women on her walls, but to the woman standing, at last, on her own. The decision to go back to the house did not arrive as a dramatic revelation. It slipped in quietly, sometime between Lena's departure and the soft knock of afternoon rain against her office window. For hours, Amara moved through the museum like a conductor guiding an orchestra, her focus disciplined, her gestures precise. She checked lighting angles, confirmed conservation notes, adjusted labels so that the names of long-ignored artists would be read clearly and without strain. The work steadied her, it always had. But beneath every task, a steady hum persisted. You must go home. Not his home, the house you helped build. You must see it with clear eyes at least once before you leave it behind. By late afternoon, the rain had slowed to a mist. The sky over New Orleans had turned the color of bruised lavender, clouds trailing like silk across the horizon. She gathered her bag, slipped on her jacket, and told the front desk she would be out for the rest of the day. Zoe texted, "Do you want company?" Amara stared at the screen, tempted. Then she typed back, "Not for this part. I'll call you after." There were some ruins one had to walk through alone. The Creole townhouse on Esplanade had never been just a house. When they bought it 8 years ago, it had been a sagging, tired beauty, cracked plaster, leaning shutters, floors that groaned under the weight of time. Evan had seen possibilities in its bones. Amara had seen ghosts in its walls. Together, they'd restored it. He drafted plans, sketched new staircases and openings. She argued for preserving original moldings, insisted on leaving one stretch of exposed brick where someone, long ago, had etched initials near the floor. It became their shared project, a physical testament to the story they believed they were writing together. Now, standing at the front gate with her keys in hand, she felt a strange sense of trespass. The wrought iron creaked softly as she pushed it open. She climbed the short set of steps to the front door, sliding the key into the lock with a muscle memory her body still held, even as her heart resisted. The hinges sighed, as if in recognition. Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and faint jasmine, the same diffuser she'd placed on the console months ago. The entryway lay in a hush, its tall mirror reflecting her figure back at her. A woman standing in the threshold of a life that no longer fit. Her heels made soft sounds against the dark wood as she moved into the parlor. Nothing had changed. The curved sofa, upholstered in indigo velvet, sat beneath the tall windows, the throw blanket she'd chosen folded neatly over the back. The built-in bookshelves still held their mingled lives, his architecture monographs, her art history texts, novels they'd once read together and debated over glasses of wine. On the mantel, votive candles stood in a line like witnesses, their wicks unlit. On the wall, a framed photograph captured them at the townhouse's housewarming party. Evan with his arm around her waist, Amara laughing at something just off camera, eyes crinkled, head tilted back in unguarded joy. She stepped closer. The woman in that photograph looked like another person, someone who believed that partnership meant safety, that shared dreams would remain shared forever. Amara lifted the frame from its hook and held it for a moment, the weight solid in her hands. Carefully, she set it face down on a nearby sideboard. The soft click of glass against wood echoed louder than it should have. She moved through the house room by room, like a curator taking final inventory. The kitchen, with its deep farmhouse sink and open shelving, still bore the imprint of their rituals. Mismatched mugs from markets they'd visited, a worn wooden cutting board scarred by years of chopping onions for gumbo and garnish for cocktails. A half-empty bag of his favorite coffee beans sat by the grinder, a small domestic intimacy that struck her harder than any grand gesture. She touched the bag with her fingertips, then withdrew her hand. Upstairs, the light faded to a softer gray. Their bedroom door stood slightly ajar, as though she had only just left for a quick errand. She pushed it open. The bed was made neatly, the slate gray duvet smooth and uncreased. Her scarf from yesterday lay folded on the chair by the window, placed there by habit or by him, she couldn't tell. On the nightstand on her side, a book lay open, spine up, a collection of essays on memory and art, abandoned at a sentence that now felt almost cruelly apt. We arrange our recollections like galleries, choosing what to hang and what to store in the dark. Her throat tightened. She opened the closet. Their clothes still hung side by side, her dresses and blouses, his shirts and suits, color gradients accidentally harmonious. There was a kind of intimacy in that shared space that felt suddenly invasive. She reached for a small suitcase from the top shelf and set it on the bed. She did not pack in a rush. She chose deliberately a few favorite dresses, the well-worn jeans she painted in, the soft t-shirts she slept in when she wasn't trying to look like anyone's idea of grace. Jewelry came next, her grandmother's bracelet, earrings gifted by her mother, a silver ring she had bought for herself after her first major exhibition. Each object felt like a thread being unstitched from the tapestry of the house. In the bottom drawer of the dresser, she found the small shoebox where she had kept ticket stubs from trips, postcards, scribbled notes Evan had once left on the refrigerator. For a moment, she simply looked at it, hands resting on the cardboard lid. Then she closed the drawer again, leaving the box where it was. Some relics belonged to the past. They did not need to be carried forward. There was one more room she had to visit. Down the hall, at the end, lay the study, Evan's sanctuary. She hesitated at the threshold. They had agreed years ago that his office would be his and hers would be hers. Separate spaces to think, to dream, to work. Tonight, that boundary felt less like respect and more like a wall she had been encouraged never to look behind. She turned the knob. The office was clean, precise, a reflection of his mind when it was at its best. Drafting table by the window, shelves lined with models and journals, framed blueprints of projects he was particularly proud of. On the far wall, a large corkboard pinned with notes and timelines for the campaign. She moved closer, scanning the meticulous lists, fundraising benchmarks, debate prep, endorsement targets. A few events were circled, among them the date of their anniversary, marked not with a heart, but with a small meeting notation. Dinner with L and potential donors? Her gaze lingered on that ampersand, as if its casual inclusion were a confession. On the desk, a file lay partially open, pages askew. She didn't intend to snoop. She had never been the one to rifle through drawers. But the top page bore her own name in fine print, listed as co-owner on the deed to the townhouse. Behind it, more documents, joint accounts, investment portfolios, legal agreements she'd signed quickly during better days, trusting his cheerful summaries. Now she read them not as wife, but as historian and witness. She pulled out her phone and began to photograph the documents one by one, not with malice, but with the quiet pragmatism of someone who understood that narratives, financial ones as much as cultural, are shaped by what is preserved. As the camera clicked softly, she thought of Lena's words. I refuse to let him be the only author of this story. When she finished, she carefully returned the papers to their folder, leaving nothing disturbed. She was not here to destroy. She was here to see clearly. On a lower shelf, something caught her eye. A small, dust-coated cardboard tube tucked behind a row of rolled blueprints. She pulled it out, uncapped it, and gently unrolled what lay inside. It was the original sketch they'd made together for the townhouse. Their first late-night scribble over takeout, lines crisscrossing, her notes in the margins arguing for light and openness, his for structural integrity. She had forgotten he'd kept it. Her fingers traced her own handwriting. Leave this wall. Not everything old is broken. The words struck her with almost physical force. She rolled the paper back up and slid it into the tube. This, she decided, she would take with her. Not as a relic of their shared dream, but as a reminder of who she had always been. Someone who knew that preservation and transformation could coexist. That you didn't have to demolish everything to build something new. Downstairs, the house had grown darker, dusk pooling in corners. She carried the suitcase to the front door, the small cardboard tube tucked under her arm. On the console table, her keys waited in the ceramic dish where she had always dropped them. She stared at them for a long moment. Then she took one, the copy to the front door, and slid it onto the table beside the dish, separate from the rest. The gesture was small, but it felt like closing a chapter with ink still wet. As she opened the front door, evening air pressed against her, warm and fragrant, carrying faint traces of rain and distant cooking. She stepped out, the suitcase wheels bumping gently over the threshold. On the sidewalk, she turned back once, looking up at the house. The windows glowed softly from the lights she had forgotten to turn off, making the interior look inviting, golden, full. It occurred to her that someone passing by might see it and imagine a life unfolding peacefully within. A couple cooking, music playing, laughter drifting through the rooms. Appearances, she knew better than most, were often curated illusions. Thank you, she whispered, not to Evan, not tonight, but to the house itself. For shelter, for memories, for teaching her the difference between shared dreams and shared walls. Then she turned away and walked toward the waiting cab at the curb, the townhouse receding behind her like a painting she had finally decided to step out of and into the open air of her own unfinished story. The cab's headlights cast a pale fan of light along the curb as Amara stepped through the iron gate, suitcase rolling obediently behind her. The air held that peculiar stillness that follows rain. Streets washed clean, leaves glistening, the city pausing between storms. She had almost reached the sidewalk when the familiar growl of an engine curled around the corner. A black sedan eased to a stop in front of the townhouse, the beams of its headlights washing over her like an unwanted spotlight. The driver's door opened. Evan stepped out. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. He took in the suitcase first, then the cardboard tube tucked under her arm, then the set of her shoulders. Tall, composed, unflinching. Whatever words he'd come prepared with seemed to fall away. "Mara," he said, her name leaving him on a breath that sounded more like a plea than a greeting. She didn't answer. The cab idled behind her, a quiet promise of escape humming at her back. He closed his car door and walked toward her, stopping just inside the gate, as though aware that crossing farther would violate some invisible boundary he no longer had the right to ignore. "You went inside," he said softly. "I saw the lights from the street." "Yes," she replied. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. "I lived here. It seemed appropriate to say goodbye." He flinched at the word, his gaze flicking briefly to the suitcase again. "We don't have to." "Yes," she repeated more firmly. "We do." Silence swelled between them, filled with all the unspoken endings they'd postponed over the last year. "I came to talk," Evan began, fingers curling and uncurling at his sides. "Not about the campaign, not about donors. About us. About—" "I know about the donors," she interrupted quietly. "Or rather, I know about their retreat." His mouth tightened. "Lena came to you." "Yes," Amara said. "She did." A flicker of something like hurt crossed his face. "Of course she did," he murmured. "Of course she went to you." Amara tilted her head, studying him. "You sound almost jealous," she said, as if her choosing honesty with me is another betrayal. He looked up sharply, meeting her gaze. For the first time, she saw the exhaustion there, not as a performance, but as something raw. Dark smudges under his eyes, lines etched deeper around his mouth, his usual polish dulled at the edges. "I'm not jealous," he said hoarsely. "I'm ashamed. You both deserve better than the man I've been." The admission lingered in the air, strangely fragile. Amara shifted her weight, the small wheels of the suitcase clicking softly against the uneven stone. "You told her we were separated," she said, "that I was staying for appearances, for strategy." He closed his eyes briefly. "I told myself it was almost true," he said, "that we'd been drifting, that you were always gone, that we were more partners than lovers." "Partners," she echoed. "That's an interesting word for what you turned us into." His shoulders sagged. When the campaign picked up, everything became about momentum. Every connection, every endorsement, every photo op. If it moved us forward, I grabbed it. I kept thinking I'd make it right later, after the election, after things calmed down. "And in the meantime," she said quietly, "you asked me to stand beside you, smile for cameras, lend my reputation to your image, all while you built a future that didn't include me." "It did include you," he protested, a spark of his old intensity flaring. "I saw us in City Hall." "In City Hall," she cut in. "As what? As the polished, forgiving wife shaking hands while you positioned yourself as a visionary? Or as the woman you quietly erased in private so you could feel unburdened in someone else's arms?" The question sliced cleanly through his defense. He looked away, jaw working. "I thought," he said finally, "that if I kept the pieces separate, no one would get hurt." She stared at him, a kind of quiet wonder washing through her. Not admiration, but astonishment at how profoundly he had underestimated the people in his life. "You hurt everyone, Evan," she replied softly. "Lena, her family, your team, me. And whether you realize it or not, you hurt yourself most of all. Because in the end, you built a life so compartmentalized that there's nowhere left you can stand without stepping on the wreckage. He swallowed, throat bobbing. I talked to her father this afternoon, he said. He's pulling out of all my projects. The campaign is, he exhaled, a short, humorless breath. Let's just say the path to City Hall is no longer straight. For a moment, she felt an old impulse rise, the urge to comfort, to reassure, to step into the role she had honed over years, the one who steadied him when his grand plans met reality. She let the impulse pass. I'm sorry, she said, and surprised herself with how much she meant it. Not for your ambitions collapsing, for the version of you that could have done great things without destroying the people who believed in him. He looked at her then, eyes shining with something dangerously close to tears. I don't know how to be that man without you, he whispered. The words, once, would have undone her, would have tugged at every soft place inside her, every tender memory of late-night conversations and shared dreams. But tonight, they landed differently. That, she said gently, is precisely the problem. He blinked. She continued. You hitched your better self to my presence, she said. You've treated my love as scaffolding for the person you wanted to be. But scaffolding isn't meant to hold up a building that's already leaning out of integrity. He flinched, as if struck. You can't make me responsible, she went on, for whether you choose to be honorable or not. That decision has to belong to you. Without my gaze, without my applause, without my forgiveness waiting at the end of each misstep. For a long moment, all that moved was the faint stirring of leaves overhead. I don't want to lose you, he said finally, voice rough. 15 years, Amara. That has to count for something. It does, she replied. It counts as a history, as a season, as a chapter that shaped me in ways I'll be unpacking for years. But length alone doesn't guarantee a future. He took a step closer, and the cab's headlights caught him fully now, illuminating the lines of regret carved into his face. If there's anything I can do, he said, anything that might, one day, make space for us again. There is something you can do, she said, almost tenderly. You can stop asking me to gamble my self-respect on your potential. He stared at her, breathing shallowly. I met with a lawyer today, she added, calm as a weather report. Nothing dramatic, no scenes, just information. A path. I've photographed the documents in your office related to our shared assets. I'm not here to strip you bare, Evan. I'm here to claim what I helped build. He nodded slowly, as if each word were a stone he had to lift and carry. I won't fight you, he said. On the house, on the accounts, you have my word. She believed him, not because he had never lied, but because this sounded less like a strategy and more like surrender. As for us, she said, I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday we'll be able to speak without this ache between us. Maybe we'll nod across a gallery or exchange polite words at a conference. But whatever we become, it won't be the thing we were. That's gone. A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. I never wanted to be the man who broke you, he whispered. Amara felt something inside her soften, not toward him, but toward herself. The woman who had stayed, believed, invested. The woman now standing here, suitcase at her side, choosing herself at last. You didn't break me, she said quietly. You broke the version of me who thought loving you meant shrinking so you could shine. She's gone. I'm still here. For the first time, he seemed to see her. Not as wife or adornment or asset, but as a separate, sovereign person standing on ground he no longer owned. The cab driver leaned out the window, clearing his throat gently. Ma'am, he called, we still headed to that address? Amara turned slightly. Yes, she answered. Then to Evan, I have a place to stay, with my sister for now. After that, I'll decide. He nodded, blinking back whatever words had risen next. She reached for the suitcase handle and began to roll it toward the cab. As she passed him, he said, in a voice so low it nearly vanished in the night, I'm sorry, Amara. For all of it. She paused with her hand on the car door. The apology hung there, thin as smoke, unable to change the past but perhaps softening its edges. "I believe you're sorry," she said. "I hope one day you're also changed." With that, she slid into the back seat. The cab pulled away from the curb, tires hissing softly on the damp street. In the rearview mirror, the townhouse shrank. A glowing rectangle of light, Evan's figure a dark silhouette on the sidewalk, hands limp at his sides. As the car turned the corner, the house disappeared from view. For the first time since the night at the Marini Lantern, Amara felt something that was not grief or anger or stunned disbelief. She felt space. Inside that space, fragile but real, the faint outline of a new life began to emerge. Still blurry, still unformed, but unquestionably hers. 3 weeks after the night that had split her life into before and after, the museum glowed like a lantern against the humid New Orleans evening. Spotlights swept slowly across the facade, catching the banners for Unseen Lines, Black Women in the Making of Modern Art, and rendering them almost luminous. Cars glided up to the entrance, spilling out tuxedos, silk, diamonds, and the careful laughter of people accustomed to moving through important rooms. From the third-floor office that had become both refuge and watchtower, Amara stood before the tall window and watched the arrivals. The courtyard below shimmered with crystal and candlelight. Waiters in crisp white jackets threaded between tables laid with linen and glass. The air carried the faint blur of a jazz trio warming up, the low murmur of bass, the gentle testing of keys. Her gown hung on the garment rack behind her like a piece of architecture, designed by Marisol in a fever of inspiration that had left her paints untouched for days. It was a deep, saturated copper that honored the warmth of Amara's skin, the fabric draping and folding with a quiet drama, structured at the shoulders and fluid at the hem. The neckline was elegant but unapologetic, the back an open sweep like a brushstroke. "Are you planning to just admire it all night from across the room?" Zoe's voice floated in from the doorway. Amara turned. Zoe lounged against the doorframe in a tailored black jumpsuit, gold cuff gleaming at her wrist, hair in a sleek knot that told the world she was not here for anyone's nonsense. "Stalling," Amara admitted, "or rehearsing. I'm not sure which." Zoe stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "You don't need rehearsal," she said. "You've lived this exhibition for years. Anything you say tonight is just you thinking out loud in public." Marisol followed close behind, carrying a small makeup case and radiating her particular brand of theatrical energy. Her dress was a cascade of emerald silk, earrings like tiny suns at her ears. "Our masterpiece is ready for its curator," she announced, clapping her hands once. "Sit. Let me finish your face before you start giving speeches with half-blended foundation. We cannot have that." Amara laughed, a real laugh, lighter than any that had escaped her in weeks. She allowed herself to be guided to the chair, watched in the mirror as Marisol's deft fingers traced liner along her lashes, brightened her lips with a deep berry stain. Zoe adjusted the copper gown once Amara slipped into it, smoothing an invisible wrinkle, fastening the delicate clasp at the nape of her neck. "You look like the thesis of this exhibition," Zoe said simply, stepping back to admire her. Uncompromised. Amara studied her reflection. The woman in the mirror was not untouched by what had happened. There was a new gravity in her eyes, a depth that hadn't been there before. But there was also a steadiness, a sense of having walked through fire and found, to her own surprise, that she was not made of tinder after all. "Ready?" Marisol asked, resting her hands lightly on Amara's shoulders. "No," Amara replied, "but I'm going anyway." They descended together, a small procession of copper, emerald, and black. Staff they passed in the hallway offered quiet smiles, nods of encouragement. A young art handler paused with a crate in his hands and whispered, "We're proud of you, Dr. Lewis." The words landed in her chest like a warmth she hadn't known she needed. In the anteroom just inside the museum's main doors, Daniel was waiting, bow tie slightly askew, cheeks flushed with the particular adrenaline of opening nights. "Dr. Lewis," he said, eyes widening as he took in her appearance. "If the art doesn't stun them into silence, you will." "Let's hope it's the art," she replied softly. They paused at the great doors that opened onto the grand steps. Beyond, she could hear the rush of voices, the staccato bursts of camera flashes, the shouted questions of reporters penned politely behind velvet ropes. "Remember," Zoe murmured at her side, "you choose which questions you answer. You are not obligated to narrate your own wounds for public consumption." Amara nodded, exhaled once, and stepped forward as the doors swung open. The night greeted her in a flare of light and sound. Camera flashes flickered like small storms, catching the gleam of her gown, the line of her shoulders. Reporters called her name, voices overlapping. "Dr. Lewis, over here. Is Councilman Whitfield attending with you tonight? Does the exhibition reflect what you've been going through personally? How do recent revelations affect the museum's reputation?" She raised a hand, not to shield herself but to still the noise. The crowd hushed in increments, curiosity tightening its focus. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying with natural authority down the marble steps. "Tonight is not about personal matters. Tonight is about the artist whose work has been waiting, in some cases for decades, for a night like this." She let her gaze sweep the gathered press, then soften. "Unseen Lines is an exhibition about Black women who shaped the language of modern art, while the world often refused to say their names," she continued. "They are the reason these doors are open tonight. My life, like anyone's, is complicated. Their work is revolutionary. Let us keep our eyes on the revolution." A few reporters lowered their microphones, disarmed by the dignity of her refusal. Others scribbled notes furiously, aware that they'd just been handed a quote both graceful and unyielding. Zoe and Marisol flanked her as they moved up the steps and into the museum, not as bodyguards, but as witnesses. Inside, the lobby had been transformed. Arrangements of white lilies and eucalyptus scenting the air, light washing warm over stone. Guests mingled, laughing and gesturing toward the entrance to the main gallery, where the exhibition's title glowed in gilded lettering against a field of deep blue. As she entered the gallery, conversation ebbed, then resumed at a softer volume, like a collective intake of breath. The first room held early works, small paintings, layered collages, sketches on yellowed paper. Each wall label bore a name that had once lived only in footnotes. Now they stood front and center. "Amara," Genevieve Duplass called, gliding toward her in a gown that glittered like starlight. "My dear, you've done it. It's transcendent." "Wait until you see the third room," Malcolm added, appearing at Genevieve's elbow, eyes bright. The installation with the projected archival footage. I had chills. Compliments washed over her, sincere and effusive. She absorbed them, passing them inward to the ghosts of the women whose work surrounded her. They were the ones being seen tonight. She was simply the conduit. At the far end of the gallery, a podium had been set up near a monumental canvas that anchored the exhibition. Daniel tapped a spoon gently against his champagne flute, the clear chime traveling easily through the space. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, "if I may have your attention." The room quieted, heads turned, murmurs faded into an expectant hush. "It is my profound honor," Daniel continued, "to present the visionary behind Unseen Lines, our very own Dr. Amara Lewis." Applause rose, warm and sustained. It swelled, rolled, softened only when she stepped to the podium, the copper of her gown catching the light like a flame banked for control rather than consumption. She rested her hands lightly on the wood, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers calm as she met the eyes of the crowd. "Thank you," she began, "not just for being here tonight, but for being willing to see what has, for too long, been overlooked." She gestured gently toward the surrounding works. The artists in this exhibition created in kitchens, in shared studios, in corners of living rooms after long shifts at other jobs. They painted while their children slept, while their husbands snored, while their communities told them subtly and not so subtly that what they were doing was a hobby, not a calling. Soft murmurs of recognition moved through the room. They were told that their work was derivative, decorative, secondary, she continued. Yet when we look closely, we see that their lines, their colors, their experiments are everywhere in the language of modern art. They were not following, they were leading, even when no one admitted they were looking. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. The question this exhibition asks is simple. What happens to our understanding of history when we put the erased back into the frame? The silence that followed was thick with attention. And perhaps, she added, her voice lowering, we might ask ourselves a more intimate version of that question. In our own lives, whose labor, whose love, whose vision have we quietly relied upon while failing to fully acknowledge it? Whose presence have we treated as a given rather than a gift? The words slipped from prepared commentary into something truer, pulled from a well deeper than scholarship. A few guests shifted, thoughtful. Some looked at their partners. Some looked at the art. I invite you, Amara said, to see these works, not as a correction, but as a restoration. A restoration of truth, of credit, of visibility. And in doing so, perhaps to consider the unseen lines in your own stories as well. She stepped back to another swell of applause, louder this time, tinged with something like reverence. As the crowd dispersed into the galleries, an usher hurried subtly to Daniel's side and murmured something in his ear. His expression tightened for a heartbeat, then smoothed. He crossed quietly to Amara. We have a minor situation at the entrance, he said under his breath. Security has it handled, but I thought you should know. Her stomach sank, but her face remained calm. He's here, she said, not a question. Yes, Daniel replied. He's been told his name is no longer on the guest list. He's insistent. Are the press aware? She asked. Not yet, Daniel said. We've kept him outside the main sightlines. She considered for a long second, then shook her head gently. Let security do their job, she said. This night doesn't belong to him. For a moment, she allowed herself to picture it. Evan at the doors, arguments fraying, desperation showing through the cracks in the persona he'd polished so carefully. The man who had always been admitted, into rooms, into circles, into her heart, now meeting a boundary he could not charm his way past. The image brought no pleasure, only a quiet, necessary sense of balance. She turned away from the thought and back to the art. As the evening deepened, conversations wove around her, about brushwork and color palettes, about forgotten biographies and newly discovered archives. Critics approached her with thoughtful questions. Artists thanked her for the platform. Young interns watched her with shining eyes, seeing not scandal, but possibility. Near the end of the night, she found herself standing alone before the exhibition's final piece. A large, self-portrait by a mid-century painter who'd been almost entirely omitted from mainstream histories. The woman stared out from the canvas with a gaze that was neither pleading nor defiant. It was simply sure. You knew, Amara whispered, barely moving her lips. You created anyway, knowing they might never say your name while you were here to hear it. In the reflection of the glass, Amara saw herself standing alongside the painted woman, a faint overlay of present and past. Two black women, separated by decades, united by the stubborn decision to exist fully, even when the world attempted to crop them out. Behind her, she felt, rather than saw, Zoe and Marisol draw near, one on each side, without a word. For the first time in a long time, Amara did not feel like she was performing strength. She simply felt strong. Autumn slipped out of New Orleans almost unnoticed, and winter, such as it was in the Gulf South, came and went with only the faintest chill. By the time spring unfurled fully, Amara's life had shifted so profoundly that when she glanced back over her shoulder, the woman standing in the doorway of the Creole townhouse felt like someone she had once studied rather than someone she had been. She now woke each morning to a different skyline. Atlanta's old Fourth Ward spread out beyond the tall warehouse windows of her loft. all brick and glass and young trees planted in straight, hopeful lines. The Beltline curved nearby, a stitched path of cyclists and joggers and muralists at work. On clear days, the city's towers rose in the distance like a modest choir rather than a shouting chorus. The loft itself had once been a cotton mill. Now sunlight poured across polished concrete floors and exposed beams, catching on shelves of books and clusters of plants that had somehow survived her distracted care. Large canvases leaned against one wall, some finished works by artists she loved, some blank, purchased with the intention of something, not painting. She knew her gifts, but perhaps inviting others to leave their mark. She stood at the wide kitchen island, barefoot in soft cotton, pouring coffee into a mug she'd picked up at a local ceramic shop. The mug was uneven, slightly lopsided, the glaze pooled at the bottom in a small crescent of indigo. Imperfect in a way that felt honest. On the dining table by the window, her laptop sat open amid a sea of papers and sticky notes, the screen glowing with the working title of her first book, Invisible Architects: How Black Women Built Modern Visual Culture. When she typed those words for the first time, her hands had trembled. The project had taken root slowly in the weeks after the gala, when journalists and scholars began to write about unseen lines, not merely as an exhibition, but as a corrective, a pivot point. Emails had poured in, invitations to speak at universities, to consult on curricula, to write essays proliferated. Amid the noise, one voice had stood out, a patient, incisive editor from a respected press who had said simply, "This isn't just a show, Dr. Lewis, it's a thesis. Let's put it on the page." Now, chapters sprawled across her days. Each morning she moved from coffee pot to desk, from desk to window, from window back to the blinking cursor. She pored over archives, revisited interviews, traced patterns across decades. In the quiet of her own space, she stitched a new narrative with the same care she had once poured into salvaging other people's histories. Only now, she allowed herself to appear in the margins. There were no framed wedding photos here, no architectural models, no artifacts of a shared career. Instead, the walls bore images that spoke directly to her. A black and white photograph of her grandmother at her sewing machine, jaw set with gentle determination. A print of the self-portrait she'd stood before on gala night, the painted woman's steady gaze meeting her own. A series of candid shots Zoe had insisted on taking during their first visit to Atlanta, capturing Amara laughing mid-protest at a street vendor's stubborn refusal to bargain. Younger Amara might have found the space too spare, too solitary. Now it felt expansive, like an unfinished sentence she no longer feared. Her phone buzzed on the table, vibrating softly against a stack of marked-up pages. A text from Zoe, "Just spoke with your attorney. Final documents are ready for signatures. He's not contesting. You're free, sis." Amara exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for months. The legal process had unfolded in fits and starts, less explosive than she'd once feared, more tedious than she'd imagined. Evan, after an initial flicker of defensiveness, had retreated into resignation. The Dubai donors had vanished. The campaign had limped to an early end. Headlines about his meteoric rise quietly gave way to smaller items about his strategic pause. Somewhere in there, he had taken a position with a mid-sized planning firm in Chicago. She'd read about it in a professional newsletter, sandwiched between notices of zoning changes and conference dates. The news had washed over her with surprising neutrality, like learning that a former colleague had moved to another department. They had exchanged a few emails, brief, practical, about signatures and property transfers. He'd apologized again, more succinctly this time. She had responded with equal concision, offering no new openings for confession or nostalgia. The love hadn't disappeared. Love rarely obeyed such sharp directives, but its shape had changed. It now occupied a distant shelf in her mind, labeled, cataloged, and placed where it could no longer block the light. She typed back to Zoe, "Thank you. Let's sign when I'm back next week." A quick reply, "We'll make a day of it." Lawyer, lunch, and something decadent. You pick the order. Amara smiled, setting the phone aside. On the sideboard, propped against a stack of art books, lay an envelope embossed with a golden lion, the official seal of the Venice Biennale. She had opened it so many times she practically had its contents memorized. We would be honored to invite Dr. Amara Lewis to curate the United States Pavilion. When she'd first received it, she'd sat down on the edge of her bed, dizzy. Venice had been a dream so distant it had never even made it onto her list of someday ambitions. Evan had once joked, half serious, that he'd design a floating pavilion there one day, that she'd fill it with work and they'd conquer the lagoon together. Now the invitation bore only her name. It did not feel like something taken from him. It felt like something she had earned in a currency he had never fully understood. Persistence, depth, the quiet, unspectacular work of telling the truth well. Her calendar on the wall bore the evidence of this new chapter. Circles around dates for lectures at Howard, Spelman, and a small community college in rural Louisiana. A star beside the week marked Venice site visit. Underlines around manuscript due, first draft, which both terrified and exhilarated her. She lifted her coffee, moved to the window, and watched as morning settled more firmly over the city. Down on the Beltline, a man jogged past with a dog that looked like a happy, lolling cloud. Two teenagers leaned against a mural, sharing headphones. A woman pushed a stroller, stopping to adjust a blanket. Life, in all its small, ordinary tenderness, went on. 6 months ago, she had measured her days by Evan's schedule. Meetings, fundraisers, rehearsal debates. Now the metronome was different. How many pages written? How many artists revisited? How many quiet moments she allowed herself to feel joy without apology. That joy surprised her when it came. In the middle of revising a chapter, she would sometimes catch herself humming. Making tea, she would notice how the light caught dust motes in the air and feel a rush of gratitude so sudden it almost frightened her. Gratitude for having survived the shattering, for having found, beneath the roles she'd played, someone she liked, someone she was curious to know more deeply. The pain had not vanished. There were nights when a certain song would come on, uninvited, and she would feel her throat tighten, memories blooming stubbornly. There were mornings when she'd wake from dreams where nothing had gone wrong, and for a few cruel moments, she would not remember which reality was real. But grief no longer claimed the whole house of her body. It lived in a room with a door she could choose to open or close. On the edge of her desk sat the old cardboard tube she had brought from the townhouse. She uncapped it now and gently unrolled the sketch she and Evan had drawn together, lines for the house they'd imagined into being. Her handwriting curved along one margin. Leave this wall. Not everything old is broken. She studied those words, written by a version of herself who believed that repair was always the answer. Then she smiled and reached for a pencil, adding a new note in the remaining space. Some walls you keep, some you walk away from. Both can be acts of preservation. The lines from their plan intersected with the new sentence, a palimpsest of past and present. She pinned the sketch to a corkboard above her desk, not as a monument to the marriage, but as a reminder of her own instincts. Even back then, she had known that not all demolition was progress, and not all staying was strength. Her phone buzzed again, an email this time. The preview line reading, "Docu-series proposal, Black women curators reshaping the canon." The sender's name made her pause, a flicker of recognition tracing along her memory. Malik Bennett, the documentary filmmaker whose work she'd helped feature in a small side exhibition 2 years earlier. Thoughtful, soft-spoken, with an eye for quiet, telling details. They had exchanged a few messages recently, mostly professional, questions about archival footage, permissions for using certain images. Once or twice, their emails had drifted into more personal territory, reflections on home, on travel, on the strange experience of becoming more visible than one's work. She did not click the message yet. That, she thought, might belong to the next part of the story. For now, It was enough to stand in her sunlit loft, coffee cooling between her palms, manuscript waiting, city humming around her, and feel, truly feel, that her life was no longer something happening to her. It was something she was making, brushstroke by brushstroke, line by line, choice by choice. Spring deepened in Atlanta with a kind of gentle insistence, dogwoods blooming in soft explosions of white and blush, sidewalks brightening with chalk art from neighborhood children, the air filled with a sweetness that made even ordinary mornings feel slightly enchanted. Amara began spending more time walking the Beltline, letting her thoughts sift themselves out as she moved through murals and magnolia-scented breezes. The city had a way of pressing its rhythms into her, loosening whatever tightness she carried, reminding her that rebuilding wasn't always about action. Sometimes it was about allowing space. It was on one such afternoon that she ran into Malik Bennett again. She had just stepped out of a coffee shop, notebook tucked under her arm, when she nearly collided with him at the door. He was reaching for the handle at the same moment she was pushing it open. "Dr. Lewis?" he asked, momentarily startled. Then his features softened into something warm. "What are the odds?" Amara blinked, then smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. "Mr. Bennett, apparently higher than expected," he laughed, scratching the back of his neck. Malik always carried an air of thoughtful quiet, as if he were simultaneously fully present and also tuned to frequencies beneath the surface of things. Today he wore a simple gray t-shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, a camera strap slung across his chest. He looked both casual and purposeful, like someone who could spend hours capturing the way sunlight hit a fire escape. "I'm filming along the East Side Trail," he explained, gesturing vaguely toward the busy path. "Interviewing locals for the new documentary. Didn't expect the universe to schedule you in." "How are preparations coming?" she asked, shifting her notebook to her other arm. Malik's smile deepened. "Better, now that a certain curator has given me half a dozen leads." His eyes flicked down to her notebook. "And you? Writing?" "Trying," she said. "Some days it feels like coaxing stories out of the air. Others, like wrestling ghosts." "I've seen your work," he said. "I doubt any ghost can take you." She laughed, surprised at how easily the sound escaped her. "You'd be amazed." There was a moment then, not a heavy one, not charged, but gently aware. A space opened between them, filled with the soft hum of street musicians warming up across the plaza and the hiss of a nearby espresso machine. Malik broke the moment first, but not the connection. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "Only if you have time. I could use company and—" His gaze flicked briefly, respectfully to her face. "And I think you might like what I'm filming." Amara hesitated, not from reluctance, but from the unfamiliarity of choosing something simply because it felt good. For so long, her days had been dictated by others, donors, deadlines, Evan's calendar. She was still adjusting to choosing moments for herself. "I have time," she said finally. They set off along the Beltline, the path alive with cyclists and families, couples and joggers, strangers weaving unknowingly into one another's stories. Malik walked with an easy rhythm, hands lightly tapping against the camera at his hip. "So what are you filming today?" she asked. "Portraits of Black creatives in the neighborhood," he said. "Not the famous ones, though a few of them wander through here too. Mostly everyday makers, quilters, muralists, musicians, bakers. People who don't think of themselves as artists, but who are, deeply." "That sounds like your signature," she said, "finding brilliance in the ordinary." He smiled, a bit sheepishly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to give people what I needed when I was younger." Amara glanced at him. "Which was?" "A belief," he said quietly, "that making art, any art, wasn't indulgent, that it mattered." They walked for a moment in silence. She felt his words settle inside her, resonating with truths she had spent years uncovering in archives and exhibitions. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now," he said, "I want to help people see themselves differently. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life. seeing yourself clearly, even for a moment. Amara felt a ripple of understanding pass between them. Not romantic, not yet, but intimate in a quieter way. An alignment of purpose. As they continued, Malik pointed out murals she hadn't noticed before. A grandmother braiding her granddaughter's hair beneath a halo of vibrant color. A man selling pralines, his hands rendered with loving detail. A young girl reading under an oak tree that spilled across two brick walls. You know, Malik said after a while, I watched your gala speech again last week. Her cheeks warmed. Why? Because it landed, he said. You didn't just tell the audience what the exhibition meant. You offered them a mirror. That's rare. A soft wind ruffled her curls. She looked ahead, watching sunlight flicker across a row of newly green trees. I wasn't sure who I was speaking to that night, she admitted. Them or myself. Both, Malik said. That's why it worked. They reached a small clearing where a local musician played a steel drum, the notes shimmering like droplets of water. Children danced nearby, their movements unself-conscious, arms flung wide. Malik lifted his camera and captured the moment with an instinctive ease. Then he lowered it and turned to her. Can I tell you something without it being strange? He asked. That depends on what it is, she said lightly. He chuckled, then sobered. These last few months, you seem different. Different? She echoed. Not in a dramatic way, he said. More like you're breathing again, choosing things for yourself. You walk like someone who knows she doesn't owe the world an apology. She looked down at her hands, at the faint lavender polish on her nails. An impulsive choice she had made last week, surprising even herself. I think I'm still learning how to do that, she said. You're doing it beautifully, he replied. She met his gaze then, and the honesty in it startled her. Not aggressive, not demanding, just open. She felt something shift, soft and cautious. Not a spark exactly, more like the first glow of embers before a fire decides whether it wants to catch. As they resumed walking, their steps fell into an easy synchronicity. Malik pointed out a new bakery that had opened along the trail. She talked about the manuscript chapter she'd nearly finished that morning. He asked about her move to Atlanta. She asked about his latest documentary cut. The conversation was effortless, like a gentle river finding its course. When they reached the point where their paths diverged, hers toward her loft, his toward his studio, they slowed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the path. Would you? Malik began, then paused, searching for a phrasing that didn't presume. Would you like to meet again sometime? For a walk, or coffee, or whatever feels comfortable. Amara felt no flutter of panic, no sense of being swept, only warmth, ease, a quiet yes rising in her chest. I think I would, she said. He nodded, a small smile curving his mouth. Good. She turned toward her building. He walked backward for a few steps, lifting his camera in a half wave before pivoting away. As she climbed the stairs to her loft, she realized her heartbeat felt steady, not racing with excitement, not burdened with dread. Just steady, open. Inside, she set down her notebook, poured herself a glass of water, and stood by the window again, watching the soft glow of late afternoon settle over the city. A new chapter was unfolding, not with urgency, not with declarations, but with the quiet grace of something choosing to arrive gently, slowly, carefully, in its own time. Twilight descended over Atlanta like a soft sigh, painting the city in shades of peach and dusk blue. From the balcony of her loft, Amara leaned her arms against the cool metal railing, letting the evening breeze slip through her curls. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and warm stone, carrying with it the distant hum of weekend traffic and the gentle laughter of neighbors drifting up from the street below. She had spent the day writing, long, uninterrupted hours threading together stories of women who had shaped entire movements with quiet brilliance. As the sun faded, she felt the deep, satisfying ache of a mind used well, a body at peace, a heart no longer bracing for the next blow. The manuscript draft lay spread across the dining table inside, marked with notes in the margins and color-coded tabs fluttering like small, determined flags. It wasn't finished. She wasn't finished. But it was real. It was hers. She lifted her glass of chilled white wine and took a slow sip, letting the coolness bloom across her tongue. Below, headlights glimmered like tiny constellations, moving in orderly lines. Above, the first stars began to prick through the deepening sky. 6 months, she thought. 6 months since she had walked out of the Creole townhouse with a single suitcase and a tube of old sketches. 6 months since she had realized that surviving was not the same as living. 6 months since she had chosen herself, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of devotion. The woman she had become felt unfamiliar in the best possible way. Not rebuilt, not restored, but expanded. As if some quiet center inside her had finally unfurled. Her phone buzzed lightly against the patio table. A message from Malik. Found an old film photo I took of the Beltline mural you love. Thought you might want the print. Want me to bring it by tomorrow? She smiled, tracing the words with her gaze. Their connection had grown softly, steadily, like ivy seeking sunlight. Never rushed, never forced. Walks turned into conversations. Conversations into shared silences. Shared silences into an ease she hadn't known she was capable of feeling again. She typed back, "I'd like that. Tomorrow works." She paused, then added, "Thank you, Malik." A moment later, his reply arrived. "Always. Good night, Amara." She set the phone aside, warmth blooming low in her chest. Not a wildfire, not an eruption, but an ember glowing stronger with each breath. The city lights shimmered as evening deepened. Somewhere nearby, someone played a saxophone, the notes drifting upward in smooth, wandering lines. They reminded her of New Orleans, but without the ache. This was memory without heaviness, past without imprisonment. She took another sip of wine and let her gaze sweep across her balcony. A small garden of potted herbs, a string of warm bulbs overhead, a woven rug softened by time. A space she had made, piece by piece, with intention rather than compromise. The night wrapped around her like a shawl. And then, somewhere between the music and the twilight, a realization settled gently into her bones. This was the happiest she had ever been, not because her life was perfect, but because it was finally hers. Authored by her choices, curated with her care, tendrilled with hope, but grounded in truth. She thought of her grandmother's old saying, "A woman with purpose walks a different walk." She hadn't understood it then. Now, she lived it. Amara lifted her glass in a quiet toast to the horizon, to the sky bleeding deep violet, to the city that had held her gently in its palms. To visibility, she whispered, to truth, to the art of beginning again. A single star winked overhead, as if returning the gesture. She closed her eyes, letting the serenity of the moment imprint itself in her memory. Soft music below, the hum of distant voices, the steady drum of her own breathing. When she opened them, she felt something shift inside her, subtle but certain. She was no longer the woman who had endured. She was the woman who had chosen, who had transformed, who had reclaimed her narrative with exquisite, deliberate care. She was the curator of history, of stories, and now, finally, of herself. And as the night deepened, she felt something else rise alongside that truth, an invitation to the reader, to the witness, to anyone standing at the edge of their own new beginning. If Amara's journey touched you, if her resilience, softness, rage, courage, and renewal resonated in any corner of your soul, don't forget to like, comment, and follow this channel. Your presence helps keep stories like hers alive, illuminated, and shared with those who need them most. Here's to starting again, and again, and again, until the life you build feels like the truest one you've ever lived.